the largest unified military force in the history of the cosmos, a centralized command system responsible for the stability of 1,000 star systems, just stopped. Not due to a decisive battle, nor viral sabotage, but because of a single statistical error that defied predictive modeling. The command matrix of the unified galactic force, spanning the core and the deep fringes, was instantaneously paralyzed by the unconscious survival of one critically wounded tactical officer who had, by cosmic chance and poor navigation, crashed within 50 meters of a physically exhausted human agricultural technician. The galaxy had engineered for war, for peace, for genocide, and for diplomacy, but it had utterly failed to account for a scenario where the solution to a universal problem might involve clean linen and the practical assessment of non-life-threatening hemorrhaging. If you want to know how one man's desperate attempt to avoid paperwork ended up freezing the gears of the greatest war machine ever built, tell me where you are watching from and subscribe so we can start this story of accidental heroism, cosmic logistics, and the profound disruptive danger of simple kindness. The dust of Kepri Delta tasted like old copper and deferred maintenance, which was exactly what Caleb Morgan, 44, and counting every moment of physical exertion in credits lost from his meager sleep budget, expected from an agricultural marginal world in the year 2284. Kepri Delta was a designated fringe, a world leased out to humans and other low-priority species to handle the messy business of growing things that required actual soil, not just nutrient paste from the hydroponic vats the core worlds preferred. He was an agricultural technician, which was code for the guy who fixes the antique hydro pumps and ensures the automated soil converters, built from pre-collapse junk, don't seize up and starve everyone in the informal settlement of Row 17. Row 17 wasn't marked on any official UGF map, only internal resource allocation charts that listed the human population as 412 units, non-strategic. It was a sprawl of recycled domes and hastily reinforced silos, tucked away from the main transport corridors, existing primarily because the Galactic Authority was too busy stabilizing the core to care about the fringes. Life here was a constant low-grade grind against entropy, governed by the belief that if you kept your head down, paid your tariffs, and avoided big trouble, you might survive long enough to see your kid grow up. Caleb's shift was supposed to end 4 hours ago. He was elbow-deep in the casing of a Series 4 biomass converter, a piece of tech so old it predated the first unified galactic peace treaty, trying to reroute power from a scavenged solar panel battery. His primary goal was simple: get this sputtering thing to hum quietly until morning, grab the nutrient packs, and get home before the scheduled atmospheric correction storm hit. Leo, his 8-year-old son, had a knack for finding trouble when left alone, usually involving dangerous heights or questionable electrical wiring, and Caleb's internal clock was a relentless, suffocating fear of not being there when Leo inevitably required rescue from himself. He wiped sweat and grease from his brow, leaving a black smear. His greatest personal fear wasn't the UGF, nor starvation, nor any existential threat. It was simply being physically absent when Leo needed him. Everything else was manageable logistics. Governments and militaries were irrelevant noise. Small decisions kept you alive. He was just tightening the last thermal coupling when the ground protested. It wasn't the slow tectonic shifting Kepri Delta occasionally suffered. This was a hard, sharp thump, followed by a deep, resonant rumble that felt less like geology and more like something tremendously large and immensely fast had just decided to stop abruptly directly over the horizon. The power conduits in the biomass converter sputtered and the emergency lights flickered, casting a sickly green pall over the metallic junk landscape. "Oh, for the love of all that is quiet and predictable," Caleb muttered, abandoning the pump. He wasn't scared. He was irritated. A crash meant attention, attention meant UGF, and UGF meant questions, inspections, and inevitably fines for something arbitrary like improper density distribution of recycled materials. Big trouble. He pulled the portable diagnostic scanner from his belt, a brick of gray plastic held together with duct tape and hope, and flipped it on. The magnetic interference was immediate and overwhelming, spiking the sensor readout past the critical threshold. It wasn't the storm. It was focused, powerful energy release. And the source was about 3 kilometers east, right where the old, abandoned orbital impact zone lay, an area absolutely forbidden for agricultural technicians, or, frankly, anyone with a pulse. He checked the coordinates. It was directly off the major corridors. Whatever had crashed, it had gone completely, violently, spectacularly off-script, and that, in Caleb's experience, was always the most dangerous kind of trouble. He looked at the sky, already darkening with the promise of the inevitable downpour. He could ignore it, call the local liaison, a bureaucrat who specialized in apathy, and let the problem become someone else's fine print. That was the safe, logical, UGF-approved choice. But the silence that followed the initial impact was wrong. It wasn't the silence of vaporization. It was the silence of something badly broken, waiting. Caleb sighed, his shoulders slumping with the weight of inevitable self-sabotage. "Fine," he grumbled, throwing a worn utility pack over his shoulder. "Let's go see what expensive thing broke itself in my backyard." He fired up his utility transport, a rickety, open-topped vehicle originally designed to haul hydroponic waste, now fitted with oversized patch tires. He was going to handle this quickly, secure the area, report the minimum necessary, and be back before Leo realized he'd missed dinner. Small decisions. Keep the ship steady. Avoid the big trouble. The only thing he accomplished by driving towards the smoke was ensuring he was the first and, inevitably, the most inconvenient variable in what was about to become a galactic catastrophe. The drive through the scrubland was jarring, the vehicle rattling like a dying insect. The atmospheric pressure was dropping rapidly, and the smell of ozone mixed with something acrid and metallic, the stink of superheated alien alloys meeting Kipri Delta soil. When Caleb reached the source, he didn't find the expected catastrophic fireball and vaporized crew compartment. He found a wound in the earth, a deep, perfectly angled gouge stretching several hundred meters, terminating in a messy pile of warped, dark chrome that looked less like a vessel and more like a melted knife. This wasn't a civilian transport. This was military, high-grade, stealth-coated. The vessel had punched through the atmosphere with enough velocity to shatter its kinetic signature, meaning whatever had been piloting it was either supremely skilled or utterly out of control. Given the result, Caleb bet on the latter. He cut the engine. The only sound was the wind, whistling through shattered plating. Caleb stepped out, already calculating. The salvage value was enormous, but the retrieval risk was absolute zero. He needed to find the transponder, neutralize it, and get out. Then he saw the color. Tucked into a cavity where the cockpit should have been, lying half-submerged in hot, black mud, was a figure, not human. Too tall, too slender, yet powerfully built, encased in dark tactical armor that was now venting steam and leaking a viscous iridescent fluid that wasn't blood, but clearly something vital. This was a Vorkai. Caleb recognized the species from old, grainy news feeds, the elite tactical backbone of the UGF containment forces, renowned for their severe beauty, decisive ruthlessness, and total adherence to the command chain. They were the ones who kept the peace by making sure everyone knew the precise location of the boot on their neck. The armor was breached in several places. The helmet was gone, discarded or ripped off in the impact. Her face, because Caleb immediately assessed the narrow, angular features and the severe line of the jaw as feminine, was pale beneath a complex network of dark scars that seemed to catch the sparse light. Her hair, usually confined, was a cascade of black braided wires against the mud. And her eyes. They were open, dim golden pools staring blankly at the stormy sky. She was barely breathing, the movements of her massive chest plate shallow and erratic. Tyrus Corva, tactical officer, gravely wounded, dying. Caleb approached cautiously, hands raised not in defense but in a gesture of non-threat, though he knew the gesture was meaningless to a dying Vorkai. He didn't feel fear, Fear was an emotion reserved for what might happen to Leo. This was just logistics. He knelt beside her. Her right arm, massive even in repose, was flung out, gripping a shattered control panel. He could see the dark crystalline implant at the base of her neck, the coded neural authority anchor. The thing that linked her instantaneously to the core UGF command structure. The thing that made her, even in unconsciousness, a strategically crucial variable. Caleb didn't think about galactic geopolitics, strategic containment, or the delicate balance of power. He thought only, she's going to bleed out in the dirt, far from any help, and someone is going to send a squad here to clean up the mess. And then the deeper thought surfaced, fueled by his ingrained parental paranoia. If he called the UGF, they would arrive in force. They would secure the officer, secure the wreckage, and in the process, they would secure Row 17. They would question everyone, overturn everything, and the entire fragile equilibrium that kept him and Leo safe would shatter under the weight of an official investigation. Big trouble. No, 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 Caleb whispered, shaking his head vehemently. I'm not dealing with military paperwork today, or ever. He reached out and checked her pulse, locating the powerful thrum in her alien throat. Weak, but present. The cold, logical calculation of a man whose job was fixing broken things took over. She was injured, but potentially salvageable. He had basic medical supplies at home, the kind you'd use to stitch up a farming laceration or an electric burn. He knew how to stabilize trauma. He did not know how to deal with the UGF liaison officer and the inevitable asset seizure orders. Choice. Leave her to die and face the terrifying military cleanup, or take her home, hide her, and deal with an exponentially more dangerous, yet domestically contained, secret. Caleb chose the secret. He chose the devil he could physically hide in his shed. "All right, Vorkai," he grunted, the decision instantly settling the frantic nerves. "You're a large, expensive problem, but you're my large, expensive problem now, and you're not dying here. I don't care about your war. Nobody dies in front of my kid." Moving her was a Herculean task. The Vorkai were dense, built for high-gravity combat. He had to jury-rig a winch system using reinforced fiber cable and the hydraulic lift on his utility transport, treating the unconscious tactical officer like an extremely valuable, severely damaged piece of farm equipment. He struggled, he sweated, and eventually, he managed to maneuver the entire armored mass onto the flatbed. The smell of plasma residue and alien metabolic stabilizers was overwhelming. He covered her with a thick, dirt-stained tarp used for protecting nutrient sacs, making sure to avoid the worst of her wounds, treating her severe damage with the same practical indifference he applied to fixing a broken pump seal. It was a job. A very, very stressful job. As Caleb pulled the transport back onto the rutted track leading to Row 17, the rain finally began to fall, washing the scorching scene clean. Far, far away across the galactic core, in the silent, immense command chamber of the unified galactic force, a primary network indicator that had been a solid blinking emerald green for 118 standard years suddenly started displaying a soft, persistent, rhythmic yellow flicker. The coded neural authority attached to Tactical Officer Taris Corva, designed to automatically execute contingent command protocols upon the event of her death outside the chain of command, was waiting for the death confirmation signal. The signal never came, because the command matrix required a binary input, dead or operational, and the concept of critically injured, hidden in a human agricultural shed and being transported via a rusting utility cart, was not available in the operational database. The entire UGF fleet, poised on the edge of a critical containment operation in the adjacent sector, waited. They waited for the automated orders that Taris's demise should have triggered. They waited for the confirmation to proceed. The silence was deafening, spreading like a geometric shadow across billions of light-years. But Caleb Morgan, expertly driving his rattling transport over rough terrain, was only worried about whether the tarp was going to fly off, and whether he could get the Vorkai into the back storage unit without waking Leo. The improvised infirmary was an old food storage unit, cooled and slightly shielded, chosen because it was the farthest point from Caleb's main living dome and had a door that locked. The smell of biosolvents and burnt metal inside was instantly overwhelming. Caleb worked with frantic, focused energy. He didn't have time for panic or philosophy. He needed to stop the fluid loss, seal the major armor breaches, and hope that whatever sophisticated Vorkai biology kept her alive would handle the rest. He stripped off the heaviest pieces of her tactical armor, a grotesque, difficult process that required cutting through reinforced composites with scavenged plasma tools, and discovered the alien anatomy beneath was complex, beautiful, and profoundly mangled. She was very much alive, but barely. Her breathing was a ragged whisper. Her skin was tough, almost chitinous in places, yet where the plasma burns had hit, the wounds were deep and messy. "You realize," Caleb muttered to the unconscious war machine as he carefully applied a human-grade antibiotic gel labeled for use on livestock only, "that if the UGF knew I was treating one of you with cattle medication, they'd liquefy this entire hemisphere. You owe me, lady. Big time." He bypassed the neural authority anchor, keeping his tools away from the crystalline structure. He knew enough about alien military tech to know that messing with the brain link of an elite officer was a guaranteed way to trigger either a system shutdown or, worse, a massive defensive explosion. He was only concerned with the meat underneath. Secrecy was the absolute priority. He was hours late and Leo would be up soon. He had to be in the main dome, acting normal. He secured the door with 3 separate locks and covered the storage unit entirely with large nutrient vats and empty shipping crates. When he finally stepped back into the relative warmth of his domestic dome, scrubbing the metallic alien blood from his hands with industrial solvent, the adrenaline started to fade, replaced by sheer existential dread. He had brought a tactical nuclear weapon into his kitchen, and it was leaking. Leo, predictably, was awake, sitting at the salvage metal table, quietly eating a stale protein bar. He looked small, surrounded by the rough-hewn metal and recycled fabric of their home. "You're late, Dad," Leo said, his voice sleepy and accusatory. "Sorry, kiddo. The old biomass converter down at Sector 4 decided it wanted a vacation. Big electrical mess." Caleb forced a tired smile, his heart hammering against his ribs. The lie felt thick and heavy. "Was it bad?" Leo asked, his eyes wide. "Just heavy lifting." "Really heavy," Caleb emphasized, hoping to convey the physical exhaustion that excused his lateness, not the moral exhaustion of harboring a highly illegal alien soldier. Leo stared at the grime under his father's nails. "Did you find anything interesting?" "No, just wires and dust," Caleb lied, effortlessly, the way any parent lies to shield a child from complexity. He had spent his life protecting Leo from the crushing realities of the fringe, poverty, scarcity, the casual cruelty of the galactic authority. Now he was protecting him from a potential universal incident, and the methods were depressingly similar: silence, practical action, and a steady hand. Caleb watched his son. Leo was the only thing that mattered. His existence was the metric against which all decisions, including the decision to illegally hide a strategic military asset, were measured. If I call them, Leo is exposed. If I hide her, I might succeed in keeping him safe, at least for a while. Meanwhile, the ripple effect of Caleb's small, desperate choice was spreading. In the command fleet, Pylon 7 of Sector Gamma, Admiral Krovos, a career military strategist who had never encountered a situation without a procedural solution, was running automated diagnostics for the 7th time. The fleet was stationary, stalled by the persistent, illogical yellow flicker. Why is the Alpha 47 protocol not executing? Krovos barked at his operations subcommander, a frantic, multi-limbed creature named Xylith. "Admiral, the neural authority for TAC Officer Corva remains in undetermined active status. The system requires confirmation of deceased, before command chain collapse and subsequent automatic protocol execution, Xylith reported, digits clicking furiously on the interface. We have received no signal confirmation of destruction or death. But the scout reports indicate the vessel was pulverized. It should have auto-terminated, Krovos roared, the frustration palpable. Sir, statistically, the survival probability is 0.0001%. However, the system is designed for absolute certainty. Unless the neural link confirms death or the officer returns to the chain of command, the system holds. Admiral Krovos slammed a fist onto the control deck. The containment operation in Sector Phi is falling apart. We are paralyzed by a statistical ghost. Caleb Morgan, 3 billion light-years away, was currently heating up nutrient paste and worrying that the alien soldier might have tracking beacons embedded in her armor that he had missed. He didn't know he was holding the galaxy hostage. He just knew he had to keep a dying person alive long enough to figure out how to dispose of the body, if necessary, without attracting attention. His fear was cold, absolute, and focused entirely on the small, fragile life of his son. The biggest secret in the galaxy was now secured behind a locked door, surrounded by empty vats, waiting for a human farmer to decide what to do next. The choice was impossibly clear: maintain the terrifying status quo of his secret, or surrender and expose Leo to the military cleanup that would follow. Caleb looked at Leo, eating quietly, and knew the answer. He would keep the secret. He would hold the line. He would become, accidentally and against every single instinct of self-preservation, the most disruptive variable the unified galactic force had ever encountered, and the storm was just starting to gather outside. The first 4 days were a masterclass in domestic espionage, fueled by pure, unadulterated parental obligation. Caleb had successfully relocated the large, wounded, critically important tactical officer, Teres Corva, into the repurposed humidity shed at the back of their property. It was normally used for curing high-yield spore wheat, but now it served as a high-tech, low-quality intensive care unit, complete with a hastily jury-rigged ventilation system that sounded suspiciously like a dying hovercraft. Caleb's life instantly became a clockwork nightmare. He was operating on 96-hour cycles of sleep deprivation, constantly recalculating caloric intake for both his son, Aiden, and the alien who clearly required complex nutrient matrices but was currently subsisting on warmed synthetic protein paste, the beige horror that usually kept the human agricultural sector barely functional. You require specific mineral injections for somatic regeneration. Human Caleb. Teres rasped, her golden eyes flashing dimly in the gloom of the shed, still filled with an air of tactical superiority, despite being wrapped in old thermal blankets and hooked up to Caleb's sputtering oxygen concentrator. Caleb, scrubbing dried paste from a bowl, just sighed, the sound a ragged wheeze of profound exhaustion. I hear you, Teres. I do, but unless you've got a Starfleet medical supply cache hidden in your femur, you're eating the paste. It's got 17 essential nutrients and tastes like regret. It's the best I can do without asking the sector medics why I need enough plasma recoagulant to save a small herd of bantha. He had established a routine of military precision. Wake before dawn, check Teres's vital signs, which involved interpreting the shifting colors of her skin plates, a task he was wholly unqualified for, prepare breakfast for Aiden, rush to the fields for his morning rounds, use his work transport to borrow necessary medical supplies, mostly advanced antiseptic and specialized pressure dressings for his grain storage tanks, which he then applied to a Vorkai tactical officer's torso, return for lunch, covertly feed the alien, play with Aiden, and then spend the evening manually flushing the nutrient paste tubes with purified water. It was the logistics of clandestine alien care that were truly breaking him, not the moral weight of saving a life. Aiden, bless his 8-year-old heart, had immediately noticed the shed was off limits, which, naturally, made it the single most interesting location on Kepri Delta. Dad, why does the wheat shed smell like ozone and very stressed copper? Aiden asked one afternoon, trying to sneak past Caleb, who was blocking the shed door with an impressive pile of empty paste containers. That, son, Caleb replied, rubbing his temples, "is the smell of advanced agricultural science. Very advanced, extremely important. Go play with your recycler drone." Aiden, however, was clever. He knew his dad's stress indicators. And he also knew that whenever his dad was particularly tired, he was vulnerable to distraction. One evening, while Caleb was outside attempting to recalibrate the shed's external temperature gauge with a rusty wrench and extreme prejudice, Aiden slipped inside. He didn't see a dying alien warrior. He saw a very tall person with weird shiny skin who looked incredibly uncomfortable. Tayris, recovering enough to manage low-level mental communication but still unable to move, immediately triggered several defensive protocols in her conscious mind. Threat level: minor. Height: 1, 2 meters. Intent: unknown, but seems harmlessly clumsy. Protocol: engage neutralizing force. Except, her systems were stalled and she could only stare. Aiden, completely unfazed by the golden eyes, the cranial ridges, or the fact that this creature was clearly not built for agricultural worlds, held out a small, sticky piece of synth bread he had saved from his dinner. "You look hungry," Aiden whispered, observing the alien's involuntary muscle spasm. "Dad says you have a really bad ouchie. This helps." Tayris, whose culture dictated that offering sustenance was an act of dominance or ritual challenge, stared at the pathetic offering. This violated at least 3 major Vorkai cultural protocols related to interspecies feeding rituals. It was an insult of cosmic proportions, and yet she hadn't eaten anything solid in days, only the regrettable paste. Before she could process the philosophical ramifications of this tiny, sticky human offering her basic carbohydrates, Caleb returned, wrench in hand. He froze, seeing his son next to the galaxy's most wanted patient. The next 5 seconds were pure pandemonium. Caleb grabbed Aiden. Aiden squeaked. Caleb shoved Aiden toward the main house, and Tayris, using a fraction of recovered strength, managed to communicate one word via a highly focused neural pulse directly into Caleb's mind. Dignity. Caleb slammed the shed door and leaned against it, breathing heavily. "Dignity?" he muttered to the sealed door. "We're eating paste and hiding you under a tarp next to fertilizer bags. Dignity left the station 3 days ago." This successful deception, the continued survival of Tayris protected by a simple human lie, was the small victory that quickly revealed the hidden cost. In the Unified Galactic Force, UGF, command chamber, millions of light-years away, the most sophisticated military system ever built was having a bureaucratic seizure. The command grid, designed for instantaneous, decentralized action based on neural authority confirmation, was deadlocked. Fleet Admiral Vilkar, a Vorkai whose facial ridges were currently shimmering with stress-induced anxiety, a massive faux pas in UGF command culture, slammed his fist onto the holographic tactical map. "Report. Why is the Kalen 7 containment maneuver still awaiting execution? We authorized the strike window 72 hours ago." Tactical Data Analyst Krill, a small, multi-limbed creature designed purely for efficient data processing, chittered nervously. "Admiral, the Coded Neural Authority, Protocol 7 Alpha, is stuck in pending confirmation. The system requires the alive and connected signal from Tactical Officer Corva, designation 118. Corva is presumed destroyed. We tracked her crash zone. The loss report was auto-generated." Vilkar roared. "Yes, Admiral, but the system is built on zero tolerance for statistical error. The auto-loss report was generated based on impact kinetics, but the secondary coded neural authority beacon, the biological marker, is not registering death. It registers disconnected, non-responsive, biostable. Because the system has no protocol for a tactical officer surviving outside the secure command chain, it defaults to the highest priority, waiting for confirmation from the designated officer before executing system-wide lethal commands." Krill paused, then added the truly terrifying observation. "Essentially, Admiral, The entire unified galactic force is waiting for Lieutenant Corva to wake up and press the go button, or officially die. Her unintentional survival is functioning as a strategic veto. Admiral Vilkar's ridges turned a toxic shade of magenta. His entire career was based on the efficiency of the UGF system. It was designed to prevent stagnation through decentralized authority. And now, the entire galaxy was stalled. Not by enemy action, but by a missing period in the code. A statistical gap. The system had accounted for every possible failure mode except the failure of chart death to occur on schedule. "Find her signal. Force the confirmation," Vilkar ordered, his voice echoing panic. "We can only triangulate the biosignal anomaly to a marginal agricultural world, Kepri Delta, Sector 44 Gamma. It is radiating intermittent energy spikes consistent with low-level neural activity, and, statistically, 3 power surges related to primitive recycled atmospheric scrubbers." The UGF command, designed to handle galactic warfare, was confounded by the existence of a highly specific wounded alien who was breathing poorly in a human's humidity shed. The sheer colossal embarrassment was nearly enough to trigger another system shutdown. Back on Kepri Delta, the real truth was slowly dawning on Tyrus Corva. As her body stabilized, her specialized neural implant, the source of the coded neural authority, began passively interfacing with the residual energy spikes of the wreckage she'd carried, trying to re-establish a link. Instead, she received fragments, data bursts, command cues, and the echoing silence where the galaxy's executive functions should have been. Caleb was meticulously cleaning a wound on her arm with disinfectant designed for minor farm equipment. It stung like a swarm of angry plasma bees. But it worked. When Tyrus spoke, her voice still weak, but carrying the heavy weight of military authority. "The stall. It is me," she stated, her golden eyes fixed on Caleb. Caleb kept cleaning. "Yeah, I figured the screaming fits probably aren't helping. Try to keep it down, okay? Aiden has school tomorrow." "You fail to comprehend, human Caleb. My survival here is not merely inconvenient. It is catastrophic. The command hierarchy based on my designation requires my neural confirmation for all large-scale maneuvers involving containment, including the Kalen 7 sector opening. The system is designed to wait for the highest operational authority available. I am technically the highest operational authority available, despite being functionally inert." Caleb stared at her. He saw the cold logic, the bureaucratic horror show that only a centralized military could create. "So, my choice to give you lukewarm paste and hide you in the shed is preventing a galaxy-wide war from kicking off?" "Correct," Tyrus confirmed, the clinical tone somehow making the statement more ludicrous. "You have effectively weaponized domesticity. By failing to surrender me to authorities, or allowing my physical death which would purge the designation, you have created a strategic variable of 0 probability. The galaxy is paralyzed by a statistical error caused by your bright empathy." Caleb sat back on his heels, pushing the dirty dressings aside. He looked at the vast, incomprehensible weight of the cosmos, and then looked at the tired, scarred face of the soldier. "So, if I hand you over, or you die, war starts. If I keep feeding you synthetic paste and you live, the galaxy stays quiet. Until they locate me and force the issue, yes." The truth settled on Caleb like 1,000 metric tons of harvested spore wheat. He wasn't just hiding an alien, he was the temporary accidental custodian of galactic peace, achieved through sheer exhaustion and stubbornness. The revelation hit him at the worst possible time. His reserves were completely depleted. The logistical nightmare of maintaining secrecy, coupled with the realization that he was now personally responsible for universal stability, triggered a catastrophic emotional breakdown. Not of fear, but of profound, overwhelming fatigue. Later that night, the stress finally manifested not as noble resolve, but as irrational, blistering anger over a trivial domestic issue. Aiden had, despite multiple instructions, left his primary work jacket draped over the community nutrient dispenser instead of hanging it up. Caleb found the jacket. He found the dispenser. He found the sheer injustice of life on Kepri Delta. He snapped, "Aiden, get down here. How many times have I told you to hang this up? Do you know how much recycled fiber this took? Do you have any idea how easy it is for sector scavengers to take this? We are living on the edge, son. The absolute edge." His voice was too loud, too raw. Aiden, terrified by his usually patient father's outburst, started to cry. Tyrus, hearing the muffled shouts from the shed, felt the low thrum of human distress through the thin walls. Vorkai emotion was controlled, measured, channeled into strategic output. This raw, loud, pointless explosion over a piece of clothing was inexplicable. Caleb immediately regretted the outburst, kneeling to comfort his shaking son, whispering apologies into his hair. But the sheer weight of the lie, the exhaustion, and the cosmic responsibility had broken his parental composure. He felt like a failure. The next morning, the subtle shift in the invisible siege began. UGF Command, unable to send attack fleets due to the technical stall, switched to passive surveillance. Caleb felt it first, a faint, almost imperceptible humming in the air, the kind that indicated high-density sensor grids had been deployed. Drones, silent and specialized, were slowly scanning the marginal world, looking for the impossible anomaly. The zone of biostable, disconnected, non-responsive was being encircled. The silence had become an active threat. Caleb was tending the nutrient patch when the first highly specialized, disguised surveillance drone drifted too close to the Row 17 perimeter fence. It looked like a natural atmospheric sampler, but Caleb, with his deep distrust of authority and his highly tuned paranoia, recognized the specific energy signature of repurposed military tech. He knew he was being watched. He didn't know what they knew, but the fact that they were here meant the statistical error was narrowing down to his home. That afternoon, Tyrus, fully alert now, observed Caleb stacking fuel pellets for the atmospheric generator. His movements were slow, burdened. He looked not like a protector, but like a man trapped in deep sludge. She calculated the variables. She calculated the probability of successful extraction by UGF forces, 8%. She calculated the probability of her survival outside the shed environment, decreasing. She calculated the systemic implications of her immediate death, full-scale war. And then she calculated a variable she had no data for: human parental instinct. Caleb walked into the shed, dropping heavily onto the stool he used. He didn't speak. He just stared at the metallic wall. "They are here," Tyrus stated. "Yeah," Caleb agreed flatly. "I know. They're pretending to measure the atmosphere. They're very bad at pretending. You understand the consequence. They will execute a soft extraction protocol, or if that fails, a hard extraction, which will neutralize all variables, including you and your offspring." Caleb nodded slowly. "I understand. I have to turn you in, don't I? Then it's over. The war starts, but Aiden and I live. That's the logical choice, right?" Tyrus looked at him, truly looked at the exhaustion etched around his human eyes, the practical, desperate courage that had kept her alive through sheer inconvenience. She had seen thousands of officers face impossible odds, but always with training, strategy, and advanced weaponry. Caleb faced it with a wrench and synthetic paste. Logically, yes. It is the only choice that ensures your personal survival, she conceded, echoing the icy UGF rationale. Caleb pushed the hood of his worn work jacket back. He looked directly at the highly trained, culturally superior alien warrior, and a spark of that weary domestic courage ignited. "Logic is nice," Caleb said, the humor returning, thin and dry as desert soil. "But logic didn't let my kid give you a sticky piece of bread when you were dying. Logic just kept the galaxy waiting for a button press. I didn't bring you here because I wanted to be a hero, Tyrus." I brought you here because I hate the idea of anyone dying alone in a ditch next to my farm. I have one job, Aiden. And if turning you in means instantly triggering the nightmare I spent a week trying to avoid, then logic can go sit in the corner. He stood up, his posture stiff, not with defiance, but with sheer, exhausted determination. We're not done here. Not yet. Terrace watched him leave. The Vorkai military doctrine had detailed protocols for negotiation, threat assessment, surrender, and execution. It had zero protocols for deciding to protect an enemy because you were too tired to be pragmatic. This small human's simple refusal to adhere to the statistical model was the most strategically disruptive event in UGF history. She pressed her hand to her cranial ridge, feeling the faint, stabilizing pulse of her neural authority system. She was safe, she was alive, and the galaxy was still holding its breath, waiting for the farmer to change his mind, and she realized that her continued safety was dependent entirely on Caleb's refusal to sleep. Her small, isolated existence was now the anchor point of universal stability, a profound, absurd irony born entirely out of human stubbornness and empathy. The invisible siege tightened, but Caleb was already at his breaking point, and he was still refusing to yield the smallest, most significant life in the entire quadrant. The dawn on Kepri Delta was usually marked by the low, mechanical whine of the hydrostatic pumps and the distant, rhythmic grinding of the recycler unit in row 17. On the morning the entire unified galactic force arrived, the dawn was instead characterized by the deep, throbbing hum of 47 dedicated tactical vessels holding low orbital position, casting enormous, intrusive shadows across Caleb Morgan's prize-winning hydroponic lettuce. Caleb stood by the rusted gate of his compound, sipping lukewarm coffee. He wore the same stained work shirt he'd been wearing since yesterday, and his expression was that of a man who had successfully cleared his schedule for the day only to discover the entire galaxy had suddenly marked him as a mandatory, non-negotiable appointment. Inside, Terrace, now fully healed but structurally fragmented by her long isolation from the central command consciousness, stood rigid. Lucas, oblivious to the fact that his adoptive mother figure was about to either start a war or dismantle civilization, was arguing with her about the proper structural integrity of a blanket fort. "Look, you have to reinforce the apex, Terrace," Lucas instructed, using a pair of old thermal blankets and 3 kitchen chairs. "If the UGF wants to attack us, they won't get through the thermal blankets. Right, Dad?" Caleb sighed, massaging his temples. "Sure, son? They'll probably surrender when they realize we have thermal capacity exceeding regulatory standards." Terrace gave Caleb a look of pure, agonizing strategic failure. "They are waiting. The protocols are screaming. My coded neural authority is demanding I return to the loop. If I step outside this shielded perimeter, the system executes the last standing operational mandate, which, based on my last status report, involves initiating a scorched earth quarantine sequence on 6 adjacent sectors." "Right," Caleb said, taking a large gulp of coffee. "So, no pressure, just the usual Tuesday. Look, they've sent down a shuttle. Probably a delegation. I bet they need directions. They always need directions." The delegation was led by Commander Vilethra, a being of the Rixian species known primarily for their rigid adherence to protocol and their inability to understand rhetorical questions. Vilethra was accompanied by 2 massive security specialists who looked genuinely irritated that their highly advanced stealth armor was currently covered in the red dust of a marginal agricultural world. Caleb stepped forward, leaving Lucas and Terrace concealed in the reinforced and surprisingly sturdy blanket fort. "Good morning, gentlemen, lady, whatever your plural is," Caleb said, forcing a smile that felt more like a grimace. "Can I help you? If this is about the zoning violation from 6 years ago, I assure you that fence post was precisely 3 meters from the property line." Velthra's vocalizer buzzed, projecting a sharp metallic sound that cut through the silence. "Human Unit Caleb Morgan, you are designated non-compliant. We have traced the unauthorized signal signature of Tactical Officer Terrace Corva to this precise coordinate. you will surrender the asset immediately." Caleb put his hands on his hips, an expression of paternal annoyance crossing his face. "Asset? She's not a tractor, Commander. She's an elite officer who nearly bled out on my dusty floor, and she hasn't finished teaching my son how to properly fold laundry yet, so she's currently busy." Vilethra blinked her 4 ocular sensors slowly. The sheer, unfathomable disconnect between the magnitude of their operation and the human's casual response caused a minor processing spike in her external comms unit. "Human, we represent the unified military power of this entire sector of the galaxy. Your attempt at obstruction is statistically irrelevant. Your personal concerns hold 0 strategic value." "Yeah, I hear that a lot," Caleb muttered, rubbing the back of his neck. "But see, the thing about 0 strategic value is that it means you never factor us in. You never calculated for the possibility that maybe, just maybe, I'd be really tired of galactic wars messing up my day, and that I simply didn't want to see anyone else die for absolutely no good reason." The security specialists raised their plasma rifles, which hummed menacingly. Caleb simply shrugged, exhaustion winning over fear. "Look, I don't know what she is out there. A tactical variable, a trigger, an asset, whatever. But here she's just someone still alive, and if you want her, you have to talk to her. Maybe she'll go, maybe she won't. But I won't move, and I sure as heck won't let you drag her out of here like a sack of recycled goods." The tension in the air was so thick it felt like it could shatter the windows of the improvised home. The fate of 6 quarantined sectors, and potentially the stability of the entire UGF, rested on this single, 44-year-old man who looked like he urgently needed a nap. Inside the house, Terrace heard every word. The protocols were roaring in her mind, demanding the logical, the tactical, the essential return to command. If she died outside the system, the systemic paralysis would remain. If she returned, the death warrants for millions would be executed instantly. But then, she heard Lucas whisper worriedly from beneath the blanket fort, "Dad is making that face again. The one where he sounds like he's mad, but he's actually really, really tired. Terrace, are we going to be okay?" Terrace, the Vorkai tactical officer who had led hundreds of operations and been decorated for decisive lethal action, felt a profound, unexpected wave of failure wash over her. Not failure in combat, but failure in domesticity. She had promised the child she would teach him the advanced Vorkai technique for optimal dust bunny containment. She pushed the thermal blankets aside, emerging into the sunlight. Her striking, tall frame, still carrying the faint metallic sheen of her recovered skin, moved past Caleb. Vilethra's comms unit immediately stabilized. The protocols recognized her presence. The waiting fleets immediately snapped into high alert, poised for the instant activation of the containment sequence. The entire galaxy held its breath, awaiting the return of the missing cornerstone. Terrace ignored Vilethra entirely. She looked at Caleb, the human who measured life not by tactical efficiency, but by whether the crops made it through the night. "Caleb Morgan," she stated, her voice resonating with coded neural authority, the sound of command, the voice of systemic control. "The galaxy waits for my decision. The protocols are demanding execution." "I know," Caleb said, his voice flat. "So, what is it?" She looked beyond him, up at the dozens of enormous ships blotting out the sun, representing everything she had dedicated her life to: order, stability, and above all, control. She saw the control, but she no longer recognized the stability. What stability was built on the constant threat of extinction and the crushing of the small? Terrace realized that Caleb's simple, idiotic, impractical choice to prioritize one life over galactic efficiency had exposed the UGF's fatal flaw. It relied on the premise that no variable outside its strategic calculus could ever matter. Human empathy was that variable. It was illogical, statistically immeasurable, and yet, here it was, holding the entire military structure hostage with a final, devastating mental calibration Tyrus accessed the core command frequency. Vilthra watched, rapt, ready to welcome her back into the fold and initiate the purge. Tyrus didn't purge. She didn't return to the command chain. She issued a single, unprecedented, perfectly coded command. Mandate 7. 1.4 Immediate decentralization. Transfer operational authority to all subsector commanders. Initiate structural review. Command sequence. Ended. The effect was instantaneous, devastating, and entirely silent on the surface. Vilthra's 4 ocular sensors whirred, trying to process the input. The commander's internal comms shrieked with noise. The logistics AI aboard the flagship, unable to compute a command that fundamentally negated its own existence, suffered a catastrophic existential crisis, momentarily causing the primary navigation system to reroute the flagship toward a nearby gaseous anomaly. The 47 tactical vessels did not fire, nor did they retreat in formation. They simply stopped operating as a unified force. Instead, 47 independent commanders, suddenly given autonomous authority, spent the next 36 hours arguing intensely over which one of them now had the highest rank and who was responsible for allocating orbital parking permits on Kepri Delta. Commander Vilthra, realizing her career had just been administratively vaporized by the single largest act of insubordination in galactic history, looked at Tyrus, then at Caleb, who was still looking for a decent cup of coffee. You have triggered a systemic collapse," Vilthra managed to stammer, her vocalizer failing. "The sheer volume of paperwork required to address this decentralization mandate will require no less than 7 standard years to process." "Paperwork is always the real killer, isn't it?" Caleb commiserated dryly. Vilthra glared, gathering her remaining dignity. "This is not over, human. The unified galactic force will return when we have completed the required structural review, which, due to the unexpected decentralization, will be overseen by 17 different, mutually antagonistic committees." She turned to Tyrus. "Corva, you will be subject to disciplinary review." Tyrus just smiled faintly. "I look forward to discussing the effectiveness of the old centralized model with them, Commander." Vilthra and her 2 bewildered security specialists retreated hastily back into their shuttle, which, thanks to the logistics crash, struggled to calculate the necessary lift parameters and ended up hovering awkwardly for several minutes before blasting off in a distinctly non-tactical, frustrated trajectory. The fleets, now fractured and confused, began to peel away, not through battle or threat, but simply because their new decentralized commands were conflicting on minor procedural matters, leading to a bureaucratic retreat. By midday, the high orbital hum had receded. The only sound returning was the reliable, reassuring low whine of the hydrostatic pumps and the distant grinding of the recycler unit. Tyrus stood with Caleb, watching the last tactical vessel wobble out of the atmosphere. "I cannot return," she stated simply. "The authority is gone. I am a defector, structurally speaking. My command ensures the decentralized chaos remains in place, forcing them to rebuild correctly. But my physical presence would be a constant target for those seeking to restore the old, flawed order." Caleb nodded, pragmatic as always. "So you're stuck here then? Fine, but you're paying rent. And I need help with the irrigation pump. The seals keep blowing." Tyrus, the former Vorkai tactical officer, elite soldier, and accidental catalyst for galactic reform, found herself looking forward to solving the technical challenge of the faulty pump. The galaxy was safe, but the practicalities of Kepri Delta still needed addressing. The next morning, Caleb Morgan, agricultural technician, walked his usual route to the central fields. The sky was blue, clear of tactical vessels, and the air smelled of warm dust and budding grain. Lucas was already up, arguing with Tyrus about the optimal breakfast calorie intake for a growing human, a discussion that involved charts, graphs, and the precise measurements of cereal grains. Caleb smiled, a genuine, tired, satisfied smile. He wasn't a hero. He was a single dad who refused to let bad things happen on his watch. He had chosen quiet survival over epic conflict, And in doing so, he had forced the galaxy to stop, and for the first time in millennia, truly think. The galaxy did not stop because a human fought. It stopped because he cared for someone when no one ordered him to. The greatest fear of the galaxy's leaders was revealed not to be a superweapon, but the simple, disproportionate impact of human presence. The entire unified galactic force was now engaged in a messy, chaotic, and necessary structural review, debating the ethics of autonomous command, the value of non-strategic populations, and the incomprehensible variable of parental instinct. Caleb, however, had more immediate concerns. "Tyrus," he called out, heading toward the fields. "Don't forget the weed killer. If we lose this crop to the Kepri blight, decentralization won't matter when the rent is due." Tyrus, looking marginally less like an elite soldier and more like a disgruntled farmhand in Caleb's old work boots, grabbed the sprayer. "Understood, Caleb. Lethal containment protocols initiated on all non-compliant botanical structures." And just like that, the galaxy's ultimate warrior went back to weeding. Humanity. Fuck, yeah. We have just witnessed the quiet, hilarious collapse of a galactic empire, all because a single dad prioritized common human decency over a statistically sound war. It's funny, isn't it? The universe builds massive, complex systems designed to control everything, only to have the entire scaffolding dismantled by the simplest, most illogical force imaginable. The need to keep one specific person safe and fed. This story makes you wonder, if the stability of the entire cosmos can hinge on a single, unauthorized act of kindness in a dusty settlement, how much of our own organized chaos is actually just waiting for a practical, exhausted human to decide they've simply had enough? What would you risk to protect the life that showed up unexpectedly on your doorstep, especially when the alternative is allowing a massive, inhuman system to run its lethal course? And honestly, if you were a galactic commander, would you rather face a fleet of dreadnoughts or the sheer, relentless, unreasonable exhaustion of an annoyed single father? Let me know your answers in the comments. If this epic tale of human practicality versus galactic bureaucracy resonated with your own deeply held belief that sometimes the only thing you can control is whether you water the lettuce today, please do me a favor. Write the word presence in the comments below. It tells me that you stayed right through the decentralization mandate and the ensuing paperwork nightmare. Tell me where you are watching this from. Hit the like button, subscribe to the channel to join the growing community of practical human disruptors, and share this story with anyone who needs a reminder that the biggest changes sometimes start with the smallest, most inconvenient choices. And if you're ready for more stories where human spirit utterly ruins perfectly good military strategy, click the card appearing on your screen now for our next epic. Until next time, stay safe, stay kind, and remember to always reinforce the apex of your blanket fort.